Chris Kelly is a former Facebook chief privacy officer. He was the company's first general counsel, and he represented Netscape in its antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft back in the late 90s. So, Chris, you've looked at this a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it's an interesting area, and just to think about how the digital economy has changed everything and the way that people interact. Now, just because there's been concentrations of power and people are using sites, markedly, doesn't necessarily mean that they have an antitrust monopoly or antitrust injury is a critical part of all of these discussions. And so we're trying to figure out, and everyone I think is talking about this in the space, what are you trying to do? What are the harms that you're trying to address? And that's where I think antitrust law might not be the right approach for a lot of these things.
Well, we've had that same discussion around the table. A lot of what these companies have done, I would argue, is good for consumers. They're getting stuff for free. They're getting things delivered the way they want delivered. So what is the answer? When you look at it, you think Facebook is not a monopoly, no, but that Google is.
So, Google has a, market power is the traditional definition. And if you look at online advertising as a defined antitrust market, they're the ones with market power, not necessarily Facebook or anyone else. And the question is how it evolves over time. I think that defining this from a true monopoly perspective is one of the most difficult things, and that's what a lot of the fight will be about over time as these investigations start. It's going to be interesting to see how we define consumer welfare. Traditionally in the way that it's worked in with the law, it's a lot about pricing, and it's almost exclusively about pricing. But where you've seen leverage on platforms exercised for particular purposes, and the most interesting example of that right now is Apple trying to leverage itself into the sign-in market, or if it's a market at all, by saying if you use Google and Facebook, you have to use Apple sign-in. Or you can't use iOS. That's a pretty big deal, actually.
Although probably most of the ire in Washington from both Democrats and Republicans is targeted at Facebook. Right. Because how many Americans get their news from Facebook every day?
It's a tremendous amount right now, and that's changed the way that feeds. I mean, when we launched News Feed, I think that there was an appreciation that it would be a big deal. I don't think that there was enough understanding that it would be this big a deal, and that it would turn into the front page of everyone's internet experience, or not everyone, but a lot of people's internet experience.
One of the elements of the discussion about a monopoly, or is it a utility? Should it be regulated like a utility? Usually with a utility, the government has granted some kind of access or some exclusivity or whatever. That's not really the case with a Facebook or a Google. So is it strictly about how much of the market do they dominate and what do they do with that leverage?
So much of it is and should be about what do they do with that leverage. Are they doing things that protect consumers, that give them a better experience online, that don't set them up for exploitation in the future? And I think a lot of the privacy argument has been that arguing that people are somehow exploited by all of these new capabilities. And if you're only looking at this as a data mining opportunity, then there's a decent argument to say that some actors are bad here. I think that at Facebook when I was there, and they've continued to this day, and with the focus that they're turning to right now, that they've never really seen it that way. That's just the way that the world changed. The supercomputer in your pocket, that's the extension of your brain, talking to supercomputers in the cloud. It's a very powerful, powerful change in the way that humans experience life.
But look, privacy matters, and I don't think it gets nearly enough credit, especially among younger people who don't realize what they're giving away at this point, or how there may be repercussions decades down the road.
And it's very interesting that companies are competing on that increasingly. And I think that that's a consumer good at the end of the day, to be able to talk about how you can have more control over your data.
I got nothing, take it. There's nothing interesting in my privacy.
You don't know that.
I do know that. There's nothing interesting, and you can have it. But okay, so Google's so good at this that they can offer everything free. So it's their fault that nobody else can start a company as a startup because they'd have to offer it free too. So I have to take Google to court because nobody else can come in and do anything because Google's so good at what they do?
And this is one of the things that's the biggest challenge, is that if all we end up doing is crippling American technology companies here, the discussion of WeChat or anything else kind of coming into the market could be a major change. And so from a strategic perspective, we have to have the view and the understanding that this is actually a world marketplace, and that has to be always taken into consideration when you're thinking about how you would put different structures on, or strictures on American companies.
The big banks used that same argument when they were looking at all the issues post-2008. Do you think that that's an argument that flies in Washington today? Because there's so much anger at these tech companies, but there's also so many concerns about trade and competition from China and IP theft.
And the anger is about, some of it's about election interference, some of it's about challenging content online and how people's experience can be manipulated potentially by bad actors. Antitrust doesn't connect with that very well at all. And in fact,
but there's more than just antitrust that's taking place here. They've now got Congress looking into this. There's all kinds of potential regulation that could come out. Yes,
and so the regulation is not, regulation or not is not the issue. I mean, we have current regulations that there are false and deceptive practices, strictures by the FTC Act that can always be enforced in a number of different ways. State AGs are very active in this area. You want to make sure that there's a connection happening between the harm that you're talking about and the remedy that you're pursuing. And you can have massive problems and unintended consequences caused by the wrong type of breakup.
To Joe's point, a lot of consumers love these companies.
Yes.
Amazon has made my life better. Google has made my life better.
Right.
I don't want to give up my
Facebook talks
Apple
about
phone.
how users like relevant ads.
No, Facebook ruins people's lives. Well, I think because you see everybody else going on vacation, and it's
you
like
get jealous and envious.
No,
Yes.
and bullying and all that stuff.
So, but a lot of that can be addressed over time, both with tuning of the algorithm that you want to present and allowing people to tune their own algorithms too. That Facebook and Google and Amazon have different views into people's lives, and if they over time sort of present the way to live a better life, that's one of the things that they're competing on.
Are these companies going to look drastically different 10 years from now?
Of course.
Because of government.
So because of government, I doubt it. I think that consumers vote with their attention at the end of the day, and the massive reconfiguration of how that attention is brokered over time is the big story of the internet. And right now, that's still being worked out.
Having said that, how glad are you that you are no longer general counsel at Facebook?
Look, the company seems to be on the right path right now, talking about privacy and data and control and a lot of the things that I think that are actually core values there that have been sort of certainly in the public mind been challenged, that those are core values. But I think that they're setting about proving it right now, and obviously there's a lot of challenges.
You still look pretty happy right now.
Yeah, it was a good experience when I was there, and there's just a lot of wonderful change that I think has happened in the world because Facebook got to the scale that it got. They ended up being the boogeyman on privacy in particular. But what we really had is a change from a relatively unrecorded world where you could always manipulate how you wanted to see your own life. And now there's a record over time, which is great for connecting with your friends and everything else.
Thank God I didn't grow up in that era.
But it has
challenges,
and that's where the experience has gone.
No,
but
nobody wants to be reminded how stupid they were 20 or 30 years ago.
Although sometimes it can be healthy.